сатани. Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше швепливо, то для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чутно кличе дітей нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет. На моей земле тебе один ответ. Нашим лидерским мечом даже танки не пойдем. Вам не взять нас и за 100 тысяч лет.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чутно кличе дітей нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Mr. Putin, on behalf of all our guys, no one's scared of your nuclear device. You can take your top 11, shove it up your wrinkled butt. Oh, we'll come and help you fit it in your skull.
Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чутно кличе дітей нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чутно кличе дітей нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Ніхто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар. Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Mr. Lunchtime's falling! Take cover and make sure to support tonight's fundraiser! Hello everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and we are accompanied again by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome back to day 123 of the news. Luckily, I have an immune system like a Stugna, so I am back. My throat is feeling much better tonight, and we're back for another great night of fundraising to help Ukraine.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine here on day 123. I guess since we've gotten to this point in the war, you could say that the Ukrainians have defended their nation as easy as 1, 2, 3. And just like the song from Michael Jackson, they are doing pretty good and pretty much have exhibited the ABCs of frontline combat as they've been able to hold their ground. Although there is a little bit of unfortunate news today. We've been seeing it coming for a while, but it did finally happen. We did get confirmation that the Ukrainians did withdraw from Severodonetsk. But we'll be covering that later. But more importantly than that, which we will, of course, be covering once we get to the schedule and lay that out, we've seen a man return, a man who is literally larger than life. He is the reason that McDonald's shut down in Russia, and he is also the reason why Tasties is struggling to survive. This man has eaten all the food in the Russian army and is the reason why the Russians are shipping all of the grain that they can find out of Ukraine and back into Russia, is to feed the absolute girth and size of this man. And you know who I'm talking about. He's in the title, he's in the thumbnail. Mr. Lunchtime has returned, and Putin has put him in charge of the combined forces of the Russian military in Ukraine. This is huge news to me, and the joke has now come full circle because I never believed that Mr. Lunchtime would actually become the commander of the Russian forces. And here he is. It literally happened. It's like our channel is able to predict the future. We made fun of Mr. Lunchtime, and now he's in charge. We'll actually be covering that first in the news tonight, and that actually brings us to our fundraiser before we get to the schedule. Tonight's fundraiser is for Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. We've done this fundraiser twice before on this channel, and we're now doing it a third time because they do so much good for the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground. Revived Soldiers of Ukraine has been in operation since 2018, and from then, in the Donbass conflict, all the way up to the current war, they've been providing medical aid and rehabilitation services to wounded Ukrainian soldiers that are coming back from the front lines. And it's a wonderful service. We know that one of Starsky's friends actually got some rehabilitation services from Revived Soldiers of Ukraine, of course free of charge because it is a non-profit that is supported by fundraisers like ours, and due to their efforts, Starsky's friend was able to pretty much regain all of his normal cognitive and motor functions and pretty much return to normal life, although he had been shot through the head, which is an absolute miracle and a statement of what Revived Soldiers of Ukraine is able to do with some support. And so let's make sure to pour our hearts out tonight to Revived Soldiers of Ukraine. I have already put in $100 of my own money as usual, and I hope that all of y'all can help me to reach that $10,000 goal. And just before we move on, we've already reached $1.8 thousand. That is 20% nearly of our goal for the night. And we've only reached it in the first 15 minutes. Absolutely impressive, and I hope we can get even further before we get to the first question segment. But without further ado, let's get to the schedule. We're going to be starting off in Moscow today because the gravity, if y'all get what I'm saying from that, of the situation there requires us to go there first. After we cover the news in Moscow, we're then going to be moving to Belarus, and we're going to be covering the news within Belarus because we've also gotten some concerning news out of there today. And then after that, we'll actually be covering the news. Let me make sure I'm getting this correct. I do have an outline for this. We'll actually be covering the news in Kyiv after that. That will be 5 pieces of news total. And we'll also be covering the news in Cherkasy. After we do that, we're actually going to move to the location unknowns. But before we get there, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat. After we answer those 3 questions from the chat and also recognize some of our largest supporters for tonight's fundraiser, we're then going to move on to the location unknowns and the Kharkiv news. Once we cover those 2 areas of news, we're then going to pause to take another 3 questions from the chat, and after we do that, we'll then be moving down to the northern Donbass area and also the rest of the front lines, including this news in the Black Sea, and then finally, that'll take us full circle to go back to Kyiv and cover the speech from President Zelenskyy today. We have a decent amount of news ahead of us, around 26 pieces. We have started to try and limit it to keep the streams a little bit shorter, but I made sure to pick out the best of the best today, and so, without further ado, there's something that is so heavy, so large, an elephant in the room, I guess you could say, that has pulled us straight to Moscow to start off tonight's news segment. And I hate to say it, but I've already told y'all this in the start of the stream. Mr. Lunchtime is back, and look at the chunk of this man. Now, this isn't exactly Mr. Lunchtime. This is actually a guy called General Pavel. He's 67 years old, and he's a retired Russian general, and due to their lack of experienced officers, they have brought this absolute unit back into the Russian chain of command, and they've appointed him as the general of the armed forces of Russia that are currently in the Ukrainian campaign. This is groundbreaking, both literally and figuratively. I have no idea as to the experience of this guy. We've seen many people with great names come and go. We've seen Ivan Draco from Rocky IV. We've seen the Butcher of Syria. We've seen almost every single bad guy villain name that you could ever imagine for a Russian general come and go. And this man is Mr. Lunchtime. I don't think Mr. Lunchtime is going to last long, especially looking like this. He may die of a heart attack before he even commands any soldiers. But this is insane to me, honestly. I can't believe that this man is going to be in charge of the armed forces of Russia in Ukraine. I now feel much safer for the position that the Ukrainians are in because, I mean, like, you know, he may actually be a smart guy, but just looking at him, this is not a smart outward appearance. But with that, I just had to show y'all. This man is Mr. Lunchtime, and he has returned from the grave. And what's crazy is that some of y'all right now, I actually saw in the live chat, are wearing our Mr. Lunchtime merch. And so y'all actually have the real Mr. Lunchtime on y'all's shirt, and y'all are looking at real Mr. Lunchtime brought to the stage, pretty much. And he's now going to be directing all of the forces of the Russians. It's insane! I can't believe it. We predicted the future in this category here. And so my mind's blown. Bet y'all's are too. And with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of news in Belarus, which is a little bit more concerning than Mr. Lunchtime just being around. We've heard that the Belarusians might be dragged into this war. Now, there was too many news articles for me to cover on this one, and I had to take news articles on this because it was a political meeting amongst Lukashenko and Putin, so there isn't a lot of videos of it. But from what we were told, the Russians will be sending nuclear weapons into Belarus, and from what I can hear, they're actually giving them nuclear-capable missiles and just giving them to the Belarusians to, you know, get ready to quote-unquote counter the West. And on top of that, we've heard that the Belarusian government, like Lukashenko, may actually finally be preparing to join the war in support of Russia. Now, I don't think that's going to necessarily be a beneficial thing to the Belarusians if they do it, but it is still very concerning. The Ukrainians are having a somewhat difficult time holding down the east, and if the Belarusians open up a northern front again, a second northern front. I think that's going to be very concerning for everyone involved, and we will have to watch that situation with great interest because that may be the turning point in this war. And I don't mean to sound like a doom and gloom kind of person, but even though the Belarusians are pretty much a glorified police force in terms of what their military is capable of, it is still probably another additional 30,000 men that could be added on to the numbers that the Russians have. And considering that they'll be in a new front, they could potentially do some damage. So we'll, of course, keep a good watch on that, a good eye on it. But we do always have to remember that while the Belarusian government may be gung-ho to do a thing like this, the Belarusian military is what's at question here. Apparently, from what we were able to collect the first time, it was actually the Belarusian military and also the Belarusian military commanders that pretty much rebelled against Lukashenko and refused to join the war and fight in Ukraine. And so that's as far as we know, and that's just kind of a rumor, so take it with a grain of salt. But that's kind of why we've assumed that Belarus has not joined the war yet. But it appears that maybe they've been able to overcome those obstacles, and Belarus might join the war. Hopefully they don't, and if they do, the Ukrainians can hold them off. We know there's a massive amount of reserves all throughout the country. A lot of Ukraine's forces actually aren't even on the front lines, and so we'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. With that, we're now going to be moving into Kyiv, just 50 miles south of the Belarusian border, where we can see a lady that survived 2 bombings. This woman is from Severodonetsk, survived a bombing of her house there, was then evacuated to Kyiv, and now the Russians have bombed her house again today, and she's now back out on the street again. I'm just going to let y'all see the video. It does have a caption down here that y'all should hopefully be able to see, and with that, here's the video.
Котиком, ви всіх рятували. А я бачу, нормально сидить.
Та ні, нормально, ну вона вже старенька.
У вас скільки тварин ви рятували?
4,
Це у вас собака, кіт і котенята?
2 кошки.
Але ті більше нервують, так?
Ну, собака більше нервує.
А вас як звати?
Ірина.
Ірина, а ви, я бачу, перенервували сильно. Це вже не перший раз прилітає просто в будинок?
Ну, будинок, ну, взагалі, з Северодонецька.
А ви з Северодонецька?
It's a pitiful video to see and to know the grief that the poor lady's going through. And on top of that, not only is she going through these hardships, but she's picked up several animals on the way that she's trying to take care of that have been abandoned around the country. And she's just trying to save, and now she's stuck out on the street with those animals. Hopefully they can find a place for her to stay and live, since she's been bombed twice now and been thrown out of her house pretty much by a Russian bombardment. But it's a very sad video to see, and it once again brings home the actual effect that this war is having on normal people, is that it's killing them, displacing them from their homes, and throwing them into absolute turmoil. And for that reason alone, this war is a horrific thing, and I hope that the Ukrainians are able to win it in the end. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of news from Kyiv, where we can see missiles falling. We'll start off the first bit of video here and then move to the second one. Here in this little clip, we can actually see missiles flying into Kyiv that the Russians had fired at the city. It's one of the first times in a while that a massive missile attack has occurred on the city. And today, multiple civilians were killed in these attacks. Here's the video. Mushroom cloud is visible in the distance, and we can hear the whistling of what sounds to be another missile that's flying in right there and heading deep into the city and slamming into another residential block. We know that one of these cruise missiles actually exploded right near a kindergarten. The other one exploded near a residential complex and killed multiple civilians in both.
Звідки то прилетіло?
We now hear a third cruise missile coming in. It seems to be exploding in the same spot as the first one that we did not see come in.
Я їбу, бля. О!
Now we can hear a fourth one coming in. Every single one of these missiles is hitting near a residential area, and several of them killed civilians today. One of them exploded just meters away from a kindergarten. An unfortunate video. But one thing that was lucky, however, is that we did see a video of one of these missiles, from what we can tell, actually spiraling to the ground after the Ukrainians managed to shoot down one of them. While I say that, I am going to give the disclaimer that this could also be a Ukrainian surface-to-air missile that failed, but here's the video. You can see it right there spiraling to the ground. And that's the end of the video. We don't know if that was a surface-to-air missile or a cruise missile fired by the Russians. Hopefully it was a cruise missile, as that means that the Ukrainians were able to avert one more cruise missile hitting Kyiv and potentially killing dozens of civilians. A very unfortunate thing that happened to Kyiv today. And of course, Zelenskyy will be covering that in his speech tonight at the end of the stream. But with that, that's all the news we have there. This was actually the day of the G7 summit. And I don't cover political things much, and I do consider that to be a bit of a political thing because, you know, of course, I guess you could say sitting party in multiple countries goes to the G7 summit and then enacts their own national policies on an international scale. And so I don't cover that because I feel like that would start going into national politics for multiple countries. But this was of the day of the G7 summit, and just like every other time that this has happened, it's always happened surrounding a major event. The last time that the city of Kyiv was attacked by cruise missiles, the UN General Secretary had, well, actually, yes, it was the UN General Secretary, had arrived in the area of Kyiv. I believe he was actually in the Bucha Hospital Irpin area, and the Russians had then bombarded the city again with cruise missiles. And so it appears that the Russians pretty much marked major world events by trying to bombard the Ukrainian capital once more, and hopefully the West can provide some kind of a missile defense system like the Patriot defense system or the Iron Dome that can hopefully shoot down these kinds of cruise missiles, and very few will make it to their target. As far as we know with the Iron Dome, almost nothing makes it past that defense system and has pretty much been tried, tested, and proven over the past decade or so. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Kyiv, and we're now going to move down to the area of Cherkasy, where we've seen today that for the first time in the course of the war, Cherkasy was also attacked today by cruise missiles. It appears that the Russians targeted many major cities in Ukraine with cruise missiles today, most likely because of the G7 summit, because we've never actually seen these cruise missile attacks be attached to any significant frontline activities in Ukraine. They're always attached to a significant international event. And so that's what we're going off of, and I think that all of these missile attacks today have been caused because of the G7 summit. With that, here's the video. It appears that the cruise missiles may be blowing up on the bridge.
Это, Матвей, взрывная волна доходит так. Идет она сколько? Она идет сколько волна? Секунд 20-15.
Car alarms are going off outside.
Смотри на мост, его взрывают.
Smoke is billowing up from what I can assume is the bridge.
Я заснул. Да, конечно. А люди ходят и вообще по барабану. Я в шоке.
And once again, I cannot confirm whether that was an attack against the bridge, but if it is, this may be an attempt by the Russians to try and cut the Ukrainians off from supplies.
Там люди на натуре уже обосрались тупо. Ты сам увидишь, Матвей, там.
That's the end of the video, and a very unfortunate sight, as, of course, many civilians are being put in jeopardy by these cruise missile attacks. If that was directed at the bridge, that may also be a vital Ukrainian supply artery that was just cut off. With that, We've now covered the Russia, Belarus, Kyiv, and Cherkasy news, and so we're going to start moving on to our location unknowns and our Kharkiv and Belgorod segment. But before we get there, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and we're also going to see how far has this fundraiser come. And so with that, Matthew, how far has the fundraiser come?
All right, so I'm happy to report we are 31% toward our goal. We are at $3.1 thousand on the fundraiser. We still have quite a way to go, but we are still early in the stream, so no worries. I have confidence we will reach that goal before the end of the night is over. So, with that being said, Enforcer, I do have a long list of our top supporters, if you'd like me to go ahead and read those off.
Please do read off the manifest.
All right, and here we go. So bear with me, folks. We have quite a few names here. Up first, we have an absolutely tremendous $500 donation from D. Shaw. Thank you very much for that. That is extremely generous of you.
Dang.
Yes, and as everybody knows, the Enforcer already put his 100 in. So thank you as well, Enforcer, for that. Want to give you your due credit as well. and then next up, we have a $100 donation from Conazor. We have one from Old War Vet, Zwan Tran, and Vicky Collins. Actually, Vicky put in a $50 donation. My bad. And then we have several $50 donations. We have one from Stephen Merkel, Robert Harrington, Kaltenberg, Qual Vincent. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. Then we have one from Dark Side of the Loon, Sharon Tukolsky, Rust and Rot, Sharon Alaminsky, and we also have a $50 donation from Larissa Hook. So that is our list of top donors for the moment. As I just mentioned a moment ago, we still have quite a ways to go, so I'm sure that list will grow here in a moment. But thank you all for your generosity.
And I've got to thank you all once again. Every little bit that we put into a fundraiser is a little extra amount that's going to support people in Ukraine who desperately need it. And in this particular fundraiser, it is the soldiers of Ukraine themselves that will be getting this help. And the faster we're able to raise these funds and, of course, get it out to the Ukrainians, which, of course, the funds will go out at a set time. You know, once this fundraiser ends tonight, the account is compiled by YouTube and then sent out to the nonprofit. And with those efforts, we'll be able to help out several soldiers in Ukraine, or dozens of them even. I'm not really sure what the specific cost is. I think it varies from soldier to soldier and the required treatment state need. But I do believe that we'll be able to help out a massive amount of them with our fundraiser tonight. And so please make sure to support it, because it is helping out soldiers on the ground that are getting injured right now defending their country. And so with that, thank you all once again. And we're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the location unknowns in the Kharkiv Belgorod segment.
All right, and I did notice a couple of live chats coming in here. Several people are mentioning that they cannot donate because they're from an international place. So I have to say that unfortunately we can't control that. That is something on YouTube's end. I'm not sure if it's something, a legal issue allowing donations or what it is. But especially those from Australia, they constantly complain that YouTube won't allow donations. So once again, we apologize for that up front, but sadly, there's nothing we can do about it. So moving on to our first live chat question, we have one from Marcel, who says, what do you think about the U.S. sending AH-1 Super Cobras instead of Apaches? They seem cheaper and easy to fly, and keep up the good work.
Now, thank you so much for the great question. And these Super Cobras that you're talking about, just for people to know, are pretty much highly modified Cobra attack helicopters, I guess you could say, from Vietnam. Now, they've come a long way from the AH-1G that we originally saw being used there. This one does have almost twice the power, twice the thrust behind its motors, and also twice the lift, so a much more maneuverable helicopter than what we originally saw. But these are used, by and large, by the Marine Corps only. These are very capable, pretty decent. They have a nice rotary cannon. They have some of the more modern trims and fittings. And in those aspects, I believe that it would be a good helicopter to send. I don't know how many we have, though. How many Super Cobras are there? And we'll pull up that question and see a number. Wow, there's been 1,200 of them. I don't know how many are still in service. Let's find out. Let's see here. I want to try and get a specific number because 1,200 is a massive amount. I think that's larger than the Russian helicopter force combined. Oh, look. Iranians have one. That's kind of funny. But then again, if you know the history of Iran, they also have F-14s, which is kind of a weird story. But anyways, it looks like we can't get a specific number on how many are still in service. We just get the total number, which is around 1,300, which, by the way, is as many tanks that Russia has lost at this point in the war But let's see if we can get a number on how many helicopters the Russians have. Russian helicopter force. So apparently the helicopters are integrated into the Air Force in Russia and not the Army, which is how it is here in the United States. The Air Force, due to the Treaty of Key West, is not allowed to operate helicopters, and the Army is also not allowed to operate planes. And that's caused a lot of political rigmarole amongst the branches in the military, and I don't mean, like Republican versus Democrat, just to say it frankly. I mean more so who gets what kind of technology where. But let's see, helicopters. All right, so we got some figures here for the helicopters, and let's take a look at them, and let's actually add them up. And these are, of course, based off of the public numbers. They have 102 Ka-52s. They don't have a lot of anything, really, you're looking at this. 102 Ka-52s. They have 60 Mi-35s. They have 115 Mi-28s, 125 Mi-24s, 300 Mi-17s, and then the rest of them are all pretty much cargo helicopters. You can see, and the Mi-17 kind of doubles down as one as well, but it can also carry some small armaments. But this one here is entirely a supply aircraft, supply helicopter. And this one, the largest helicopter in the world, is of course a supply helicopter. So these don't really get included in the combat helicopter number. And in just a figure alone, this is the mind-blowing thing about the United States. And this is why I always say that the United States will just curb stomp anything just by its abilities technologically and also the sheer numbers of technologically advanced vehicles it has. We have 1,300 Sea Cobras, and the total of Russian attack helicopters came out to 702. And so in this one class of helicopter alone, we have nearly twice as many Super Cobras than the Russians have helicopters across their entire armed forces. And so in that perspective, I think we could hand a couple of these over. I don't know if they'd be effective. We do see that helicopters are being relegated to, I suppose you could say, tree line level, which is something that a lot of doctrines that already revolved around before this war. That's why if you look at modern AH-64s, which I'll point this out here real quick. Let me try and find a picture of it. You will actually see, I think it'd be better shown on a Kyiv, but we'll take a look at that here in a second. I'm going to try and show this. I believe, if I remember correctly, this large dome on top actually helps the pilots to look over the tree line so that way the helicopter can stay low and below it so it doesn't get shot down. That's something that a lot of Russian helicopters don't have, but just in case if I'm wrong with that, I do know that the Kyiv helicopter, some of them, do have that camera mount on top right here. And so these helicopters are able to shoot and scoot around the battlefield. That sounded wrong. But they can go to the tree line level. But this camera is, of course, well above the helicopter. And so the camera is able to look over the tree line while the helicopter is behind the tree line and in relative safety. So within that perspective, I think that a decent amount of U.S. helicopters have moved in that direction just because warfare has gone in that direction. And hopefully I'm correct, because if so, if we were to give the Ukrainians some helicopters like these Super Cobras, which don't look like they have that ability, hopefully they could be put to good effect. But with that, I hope that does answer the question. I just saw someone, RZBK08, says that the Super Cobra was retired in 2020, and that's an excellent point. And that's the perfect reason why we can send these things over, is because no one's using them. The Marine Corps, as far as I know, has, of course, retired these, like you said. And so, in that perspective, also considering the sheer number of these helicopters produced, we could send these over, and they are pretty competent. Now, the Marine Corps, just for those of y'all who don't know and are like into the whole Semper Fi, do or die kind of thing, the Marine Corps has an impressive uniform, a dress uniform, and I'll give them that. But the Marine Corps is the most underfunded branch in the entire military, and that's usually why they end up heavily upgrading old stuff. The Cobra in itself is an old attack helicopter. This thing was used in Vietnam, but the Marine Corps got stuck with this thing due to underfunding a little bit, and also, according to them, it fit their mission set a little bit better, and so they kept these things and just kept on upgrading them. But at the same time, while the Army got M1A2s, the Marine Corps got just left with M1A1s until they retired those. So the Marine Corps usually gets left with the cheaper stuff. I feel bad for them because they are heavily underfunded in that category. But hopefully, in the future, they will get better stuff. I believe that they may be retiring a large amount of the stuff in hopes of getting replacements that are new. But with that, I hope that does address the question, and I think that we could see some of these helicopters going over to Ukraine since we're not using them anymore, and they're also pretty abundant in numbers. But with that, we're on to the next question. I hope that answered that fairly well.
And before we move on to the next question, I'm happy to report we have reached 4.1 thousand on the fundraiser. We've had a tremendous $200 donation come in from Danger Mouse, a $100 donation come in from Dima Tikachenko, and a $50 donation come in from Raisha. So, thank you very much to all of you three and everybody else who is throwing in donations as well, no matter how small or large, as we always say every single Sunday. It helps us reach that goal ultimately. So we appreciate your help, and we know those on the ground in Ukraine will also appreciate the help tremendously as well. So, on to the highly anticipated next super chat. We have a question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, are Mr. Lunchtime's uniforms manufactured by Barnum and Bailey?
I would think so. Going back to Mr. Lunchtime up here, we're deeming this man the new Mr. Lunchtime. We're going to be seeing him in the headlines for a while. But just for those of y'all who just got on, this is the new Mr. Lunchtime. And this guy, I honestly think they had to go and make him a special uniform because there is no way that these things come in those sizes normally. What soldier is that big? And that's another thing, okay? I'm going to have to fix a critique of the reenacting world. A lot of people joke about reenactors because some of them are a little large, and that is true. But when you got guys like this serving in the Russian military, and this guy, and some of them aren't even paper pushers like this general here. A lot of them are on the front lines, like Mr. Lunchtime, the real one. And you see those guys, there's no way you can make fun of reenactors anymore. Hell, they may as well be literally historically accurate to this point. And so with that, I hope that does address the comment. And I thank you so much for the joke, Pakatang. That was actually a really good one. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment. And then we're finally going to move on to the location unknowns in the Kharkiv and Belgorod segment.
All right, and just a quick shout out to Ruben Kulich, who puts in a $50 donation. Thank you very much, Ruben, for that. We appreciate it very much. And on to our last live chat question of the segment, which comes from Sweaty Chungus, who says, Enforcer, if Belarus gets nukes, can NATO attack without repercussions from Russia?
No. If the Belarusians got nukes, then there would be repercussions to invading Belarus because now they have nukes. If you're talking about invading Russia, I mean, like, repercussions, the thing is that who would be giving out those repercussions? The Chinese? The Chinese are pretty much pledging neutrality at this point, in everything but word. And then the Russians, on top of that, it's not really like they could do anything rather than nuke us anyways. So there wouldn't be any repercussions if we were to invade them now, and giving the Belarusians nukes would, of course, escalate the situation even further. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and that may also be a lead up to war. The Russians may be giving the Belarusians nukes just in case the West thinks that the CSTO isn't as strong as it is, so that way the Belarusians can also threaten the West with nuclear weapons themselves. If the Belarusians get nukes, it's actually going to be violating multiple nuclear treaties that are laid out around the world, like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Acts and such things like that. So we'll, of course, be looking at that and see if it does happen, because if it does, that's going to be a violation of a lot of international laws. So, with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we're now going to move on to the location unknowns, the Kharkiv area, and the Belgorod news. Starting off with our location unknowns, which we have 9 of tonight, we can see a Russian sniper team in action. Once again, commanded by the great man, Mr. Lunchtime, larger than life.
Enforcer, I don't mean to interrupt just a moment, but we have a tremendous piece of news here. We have had an anonymous donor put in $7,500 Canadian, and we have now reached our goal. That is the largest donation in channel history.
Wait, he's anonymous. Oh, I wish whoever you weren't anonymous, because we just reached a $10,000 goal, everyone. This lone anonymous man has just literally sent us to $10,000. I gotta thank you so much, because now everyone can sit back and just enjoy the news. Of course, I highly recommend that everyone does support the fundraiser, but golly, y'all don't really have to, because we've already reached the goal. And so thank you so much, the anonymous person who did that. That is incredible that you've raised that much support for us tonight, and I'm blown away. That is the biggest donation. That even beats out Naria's biggest donation of $5,000. And so I'm absolutely in shock. I thank you so much for that, and it's going to help out.
Is that you? Is that you, Mr. Beast?
Yeah, is that Mr. Beast? I don't know who it is, but I thank you so much for the support. That is incredible. Everyone give the anonymous man a huge round of support. And if the real anonymous will please stand up, we would love to recognize you on the stream for the massive donation you just gave. That is going to help out so many soldiers in Ukraine that desperately need help. A lot of them are in terrible shape, of course, and that's why they need rehabilitation services. And they're now going to be able to get that from Revived Soldiers of Ukraine thanks to your efforts. I bet if all those wounded soldiers could thank you personally for that massive amount of support, they would. And I hope that one day the word does get over there that there was an anonymous person who put in 7.5 thousand Canadian dollars to help out those soldiers. And so thank you all once again. And thank you so much to the anonymous person for getting us to $10,000 just 45 minutes into the stream. And with that, we're now going to move on to watching this video of a sniper team, and this video is dedicated to that anonymous man who just put in, well, anonymous man, I don't know if it was a man or a woman, I'm just assuming, but anyways, we're going to dedicate it to that anonymous person who just put in 7.5 thousand Canadian dollars. And so, here's the video. You know, what a sniper team. Sniper teams are supposed to be anonymous and secret, but look at this. He's sitting straight in front of the window. He's looking straight out of it, which is not what a sniper would do. And then on top of that, after he shoots, this guy just gets up and starts burst firing out the window. The snipers are supposed to be unseen and unheard, really. They're supposed to be a silent killer of the battlefield, but these guys are not that at all.
Yes!
They're playing soldier. That's the end of the video, but what a joke right there. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russians using incendiary rounds once again. It appears that they've dropped white phosphorus somewhere on the front lines once more. We don't know where, but the results are clearly seen on video.
Я ебу.
Зняв?
Да.
Он там скинеш мені.
От, блядь, козли, сука, ебучі, нахуй.
Ти бачиш.
Все пизда, нахуй. Все освещається тут.
The phosphorus is raining down all around them.
Я хуєю, блядь, село палять, нахуй, козли.
It looks like tinsel on a Christmas tree, but this stuff will burn through your body, through your bones, and out the other side. It's deadly dangerous, and depending on how it's used, it can be a war crime. An unfortunate piece of news there, but hopefully the Ukrainians, like these, were incredibly smart and made it to cover, so that way they wouldn't get burned by the phosphorus. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see a BMP get destroyed. A joyous video for sure. And of course, credit goes to the Arozivka unit, which is made up of entirely civilians who are fighting with their own drones and making their own bombs that destroyed this BMP-3 on film. The bomblet's now on its way, and the BMP and its crew are now on their way to a place down under. And when I say that, I mean Australia. I'm just kidding. We now see that BMP burning in what appears to be a neighborhood in a village. And just to answer everyone's question, yes, the fundraiser is still happening. Just because that generous person made us reach the goal, you can still donate to the fundraiser. So if you would like to, that is still an option. But once again, I'm blown away by that donation. That's the largest one we've ever seen. And I'm trying to get through the news normally, but I'm absolutely floored that someone was that kind and generous to those Ukrainians and were able to get them that kind of support through our fundraiser. And so thank you once again, anonymous person who just did that. That was incredible. We see the BMP burning there. Of course, night vision is off, and I think that it looks even prettier without night vision on. It's a nice little calm campfire, and I think that everyone does enjoy a toasty little campfire. Vehicle still burning. Let's gather around the campfire and sing our campfire song. The CAMPFIRESONG song. But anyways, it was great to see the R-18 knock out another BMP. And while it's a small loss, this is not even attributed to the Ukrainian army. These are literally the people of Ukraine that are knocking out these APCs. So great job to that group. I wish we knew who the pilot was, but then again, I hope we don't, because then the Russians would know who they were. But a great kill on their part, and another armored personnel carrier destroyed that the Ukrainian army doesn't even have to worry about. With that, we're now on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the next generation of soldiers, and they aren't even human. The Ukrainians have been creating some kind of a duck hybrid soldier, and we can see them here marching off to war behind their drill sergeant, which is, of course, a Ukrainian man. Here's the video, and it's actually really cute, all jokes aside. We can see him running off right here, and the soldiers follow. Really cute video. And I like it. We haven't seen ducklings during this during the course of this war, but they are cute, just to say. Look at them go. They just scoot across the ground. A wonderful little video. Cute, of course. And we've actually got a decent load of funny videos in the Location Unknowns tonight. Moving on to the next one, we can then see Hit the Road, Vlad, as a Ukrainian soldier plays the song Hit the Road, Jack. So y'all know where I made that pun now that I've explained it, and I'm sure a lot of y'all do know this song, so I'm just going to let y'all hear it. So I guess you could say hit the road, Vlad, and hopefully he will soon. And I think with Mr. Lunchtime at the helm, he's going to be, he's not going to be hitting the dinner table anytime soon, because when Mr. Lunchtime gets there first, he'll eat his food, Putin's food, and everyone in Russia's food before they even get a morsel. With that, we're now on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can then see a dugout rave. Now, y'all saw the Connix box thing yesterday, like the office thing underground that they had little beds set up in and a TV and a microwave. But these soldiers appear to have set up a nightclub underground, as they've now made a rave in this dugout. Unfortunately, I can't play the music, but just imagine whatever music you want. It's kind of like a litmus test of what your musical taste is. But here they are raving in a dugout. Pretty funny video to see, and it's still great to see that their morale is high, although there was a little bit of unfortunate news today, which we will get to in a bit. Moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, this is something we hadn't heard before. We know that the Americans sent over the M142s and the M777s. One thing we didn't know is that they also sent over some smaller sized mortars, and today on film, we were able to see an American M224 60mm mortar being used by the Ukrainians in country. We can see them hanging around there. And this is an American mortar. We never heard that the U.S. would send these over, but apparently they did, and they're there. Very interesting that we never heard about this aid being sent over. But then again, I don't think it was reaching headlines, and once again, you know, it's got to be headline claiming for people to be able to talk about it here in the United States. And so I guess we just were never going to be told about this until we saw it on video. But it's great to see that more mortars have made it to Ukraine, and American ones, because these smaller mortars, while not as powerful as heavy artillery, are vital to the infantry and making sure that they are able to hold their ground or even push offensives. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see some Ukrainian soldiers surviving a bombardment.
Распиздували гараж, сука! Старлинг работает? Да. Да, пока да. Тапочки, пожалуйста, Игорь. Или его вниз, командир. Да, ну нахуй, на 5 месяцев.
Pretty funny video, and I like to see that all of these guys here, of course, were keeping up their spirits. We can see this guy here was a little nervous looking, but this guy over here was just feeling it. Great video to see, and it's good to know that he did survive and ended up uploading the video for all of us to watch, and of course marvel at the stone cold, I guess you could say, nonchalance of this guy over here on the left, and also the cool nature of this guy on the right, although you could tell he was a little nervous. With that, we're now going to move on to our last bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Russian losses as of today. Here are Russia's losses. Let's go over them. First, we can see that 34,850 soldiers have been killed, an additional 150 today. The Russians have also lost 1,532 tanks, an additional 21 of those were killed today. 3,659 armored personnel carriers were destroyed, another 14 of them today. 2 new MLRSs were destroyed, bringing that number up to 243. No anti-aircraft systems, planes, helicopters, or boats were shot down today or destroyed on the ground. 4 new drones were destroyed, bringing that number up to 630. We've also seen 4 additional supply vehicles get destroyed today, and 2 cruise missiles get shot down. But now that we know the number of Russian helicopters, which is somewhere around 704, if I remember correctly, maybe I can just go to my calculator and see. 702. The Russians have 702 helicopters, and they've lost 184 of them. That begs the question, what's the percentage? And so, 184 divided by 702 means that the Russians have lost 1 in every 4 helicopters in their military. That means that if you were to line up every single one of Russia's helicopters that they had going into this war across the entire country of the Russian Federation and put them all in one area, and then take 1 in every 4 of those helicopters and just launch a javelin at it, or just shoot it up with machine guns, or just blow the thing up, however, and you took the rest of those and moved them off to the side and then just left the burning husks of the ones that were destroyed, that's how much you would have left. Is 3 out of every 4 helicopters. And you know, that doesn't seem big, you know, it's not half or 3/4, but when you think about that as in a war that was supposed to be won in 3 days, and they've now lost 1 in every 4 helicopters that they entered the war with, those are massive losses. You can't even put that into perspective. Just for y'all to get an idea, most of the time, it was considered a major defeat in the Napoleonic Wars or the Civil War when a military would lose 1/4 of its men. That was considered a crushing defeat if one was to lose at that point. And the Russians have now lost 1/4 of their helicopters. That is awful. We don't even know how many tanks they actually have that are operational. We believe the number's around 3,000 or 4,000. And if that's the case, they've lost nearly 40% or 50% of their tank force right now. And they're just still going. They're literally going to run their nation into the ground militarily to try and win this war. And this kind of puts it into perspective that, according to the Russian government, this is kind of a do-or-die situation for them. Either they're able to bring Ukraine under their control and try and create a puppet country out of them and, of course, expand their sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, or their country will pretty much fade to obscurity at the end of this thing. And the losses are showing us that they're just going to keep going until they're ground down to a nub. But it's wonderful to see that the Ukrainians are still inflicting a decent amount of losses on the Russians, and that now brings us out of the location unknown news and to Kharkiv today, where we saw, well, we'll start off in Belgrade and then move down to Kharkiv so we can actually show the story. We can see that Iskanders were fired overnight towards Kharkiv here in this video from the Belgrade area. We can see the Iskander taking off right there and making its way to Kharkiv. After we saw this video, we then saw a couple of hours later, a cruise missile had apparently hit in Kharkiv, several of them, and one of them destroyed a sports complex within the city. We don't know if anyone was inside this complex when the attack occurred, but the devastation is obvious.
The climbing wall. Kharkiv Polytechnic University. Bombed June 24th evening.
Very unfortunate video to see. But With that, a little bit of an unfortunate video. We did get some good news from the front lines that the 40th Brigade did manage to take out a couple of Russian tanks today in an artillery strike. Here's the video. You can see the Russian tanks here. It appears that the tree line may have already been hit before, and one of the vehicles does look like it's smoking. But if the Ukrainian artillery didn't hit before, it's certainly hitting now. It's already hit one of the vehicles and caused it to start smoking on the first hit, letting us know that it was a direct one and most likely going to lead to that vehicle burning down. The next artillery shot is about to land, further up the line and towards a vehicle that we don't see on screen, but we could see white smoke billowing out of it, letting us know that it was hit. Next clip, we already saw another artillery strike, this one hitting one of the vehicles and, of course, billowing out white smoke. About all 3 or 4 of the hits that have happened so far have hit a Russian vehicle. We can see there that the 4th or 5th hit has now hit another one and caused it to smoke up as well. We'll say the Russians are now getting into the fog machine business, and I think that they're going to have a lot of buyers, because this is about the thickest and largest amount of fog that you could get from a single fog machine. Now we see the burned out MTLB that was hit at the very beginning of the video. Is now flying over what appears to be a T-72B3 that's also destroyed and smoking out of the driver's hatch, which appears to be the only open hatch on the tank. The commander and gunner's hatch are closed. In this video, we were able to confirm that 1 armored personnel carrier and 1 main battle tank was destroyed, and of course, the credit for these kills goes to the 93rd Brigade, well, the 40th Separate Artillery Brigade, which did knock out these tanks right outside of Kharkiv. Now I'm about to show y'all a very pitiful sight, and it shows how sad and how desperate the Russians are for anything that resembles a victory. We're about to go back to Belgrade, and we're about to cover a bit of news here that is just pitiful to see. Mr. Lunchtime is crying right now as they took down the sign for McDonald's in Belgrade, and they're now going to be replacing it with Tasty, period. You can see here that they actually made a big deal of this, and I'm going to unmute this, although it may give me a copyright strike, because they were playing some kind of song about, let me tell y'all the name, maybe y'all might know it, Goodbye America, as they remove the McDonald's logo from the sign. It's really stupid, it's really crazy, but here's the video. Very emotional. Probably really emotional for the Russian citizens because they won't have a taste of any good food again. They're really showing those Ukrainians and these pesky Americans by removing that McDonald's sign. It's not like McDonald's had already closed shop and pretty much left the country months before, so they really showed it to them, and they really got them. So goodbye, America. And honestly, I'm happy to see them leave, because why in the world would Americans want to be in Russia anymore? You know, that's my question. So I'm glad to see the McDonald's sign being taken down. I think McDonald's ought to stay to countries that deserve it, like the United States and every other country in the world except for Russia. So honestly, pretty happy to see it go. But the Russians, of course, are trying to make a huge dramatic deal about it. Like, look, we're breaking the shackles of Americanisms. But my question is, well, how in the world did they get into the shackles of Americanisms in the first place? And it's because McDonald's burgers are okay. Well, I don't think that anymore. I think they taste like garbage, honestly. But for the Russians, it was really good when it got over there. And it still is. And that's why McDonald's were so successful, along with every other fast food chain that was American that eventually wound up in Ukraine, like KFC. So kind of a lame thing to do. You know, they loved McDonald's a couple of months ago, and now the Russian government's going to act like it was a shackle of oppression when all it's doing is serving up a burger with a large side of fries. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the location unknowns, the Kharkiv area, and also the Belgorod area. And so we're now going to start moving down to the southern Donbass, and, well, actually the Donbass, and the rest of the news we have from the southern front before we return to Zelensky's speech. But before we do that, we, of course, have an obligation. We have to talk about our fundraiser because that is the goal of tonight's stream, is to support this fundraiser. And just to remind everyone, because some people always say, why are you harping on the fundraiser tonight? And that's because Sundays, while of course covering the news, are really focused on the fundraisers and how much we can raise through them to get help to Ukraine. So that's why we do focus on the fundraisers a decent amount. So I'm going to hand it over to Matthew, who's going to tell us how far this fundraiser was made, the notable, incredible people who've all supported it, and then we're going to move on to answer 3 questions from the chat, and then we'll cover the rest of the news for the night. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, in breaking news, folks, we have hit $11,115 on the donations, so absolutely tremendous. We are over goal by almost, or actually over $1,000, so absolutely tremendous. We're only about an hour into the stream, so we still have quite some ways to go. So we might actually reach maybe 15, maybe 20,000 tonight, but we will see. And to recognize our top donors, of course, I can't get over it. Thank you once again, Anonymous, for that $7,500 donation. That is absolutely amazing. I think that that is the largest on the channel so far, isn't it, right?
That's the largest by far. That one beats out our largest donation before that by around $2,500.
Yes, so that is absolutely incredible, and thank you. I wish we could give you your credit, but you wanted to stay anonymous, so we will have to respect that. But thank you very much for your support. And to recognize our other ones, we have a $100 donation from Makara, James Reyes, I'm Your Huckleberry, and we also had one more come in from AZ. So thank you very much to all of you for those $100 donations. And then we have several $50 donations. We have one from Sniper Duels, Loy Wen. Then we have one from Redwood Beard, Lisa. And then we have a $40 donation from Praise Adonai, also known as Bob the Viking. And that is our top donors for the moment. So thank you once again to all of you for your generosity.
And I've got to say thank you all so much once again with all of with everyone's combined efforts, as well as the magical power of the anonymous viewer who put in the $7.5 thousand. We were able to reach $11,000 already tonight, and the stream's only been live for an hour. It's honestly incredible to me, and I can't believe that we've made it this far in such a short amount of time. I would ask for everyone to donate even more and try and reach 15,000 or 20,000, but I do feel, and I did count them up, this is our 16th fundraiser that we've run on this channel. 16th. That means that we have run a fundraiser for 16 Sundays in a row without fail. And it's incredible to me, honestly, that we're still able to raise $10,000 on a fundraiser 16 weeks in, and a lot of the same people who were on the first one are still here on this one and helping to support it. And so it's honestly unbelievable to me that we've been able to manage to just raise so much for Ukraine. I think we're now at $340,000, $350,000 at the moment. I'll have to go and add up all the numbers and check. But I'm more than proud that the Lee Spring Army is the group that this channel is known for, and the group that is able to help out Ukraine more than any other YouTube live stream I know of on the platform. So I thank you all once again. It's incredible and it's unbelievable. And so with that, we're now going to move on to our questions, and we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat. And after we do that, we're going to move on to the remainder of the news tonight. And after the speech, I asked that y'all stick around because while I answer questions, I've actually thought about doing something a little bit interesting tonight, so that way everyone isn't staring at a screen. I haven't even told Matthew about this, but this is something I was thinking about doing that'll be new and exciting for everyone, so make sure to stick around, and I think y'all like it. But with that, we're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat.
And first up, let me give a shout out to Polar Doom 420 for putting in that $50 donation. And also, thank you to David Krepp for putting in that $50 donation. Thank you to Rick Hines for putting in that $5 donation. And also from Jampa Pelto Talo. I didn't say that correctly, but you know what I meant. Please forgive me for butchering it. Who puts in a $10 Canadian donation. So thank you all for your donations to the fundraiser. And Enforcer, we have a question from multiple viewers. Do we have a total on all of our fundraisers combined?
We do not have a total as of the moment. We can actually pull up the YouTube channel here on stream. Let me go and do that real quick. And we'll go look at my channel, and we'll go take a look at the fundraiser amount that I put up on the community page last. So community, let's go down to here. Over 300,000 raised. I feel like I put out another one, but apparently I didn't. So sadly, we don't have a current figure. I will have to look into that a little bit more and see if I can get us one. But as of the moment, I don't have a public figure. I think the last I calculated, it was like 325. And so I think tonight's fundraiser has now brought us up to around 336, I believe. But I will have to go and add them all together and find out. But I hate to say that. And also, another thing I'd like to add in real quick before we move on is that someone is down in my live chat pestering me to say this, and I am going to say it just to make them happy, and also because I think it is pretty cool. We are currently sitting at 79,825 subscribers here on the stream, and we are only around 175 subscribers away from reaching 80,000. And so if you are watching the stream and haven't subscribed, click the subscribe button, because you may be that 80,000th subscriber on our channel. And so with that, I just wanted to say that, just a merciless plug. We've never done that in the middle of the stream before, I don't believe, but I am going to do that tonight because we are getting really close to 80K, and once we reach 80K, we'll be on that final mile to 100,000, because it'll only be 20,000 subscribers away. But with that, we're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so our first question from the live chat is from Lawrence Wells, who says, do you think the latest meeting between the G7 have decided to back Ukraine with much more bigger guns and kit to smash the Russians?
Could you read that to me? Was he talking about the G7 summit?
Yes, he wants to know, do you think that Ukraine will get much bigger guns and better kit to smash the Russians due to the G7 summit?
I think the G7, and I just want to make sure I'm correct with this. It's a, let's see, it's a organized pluralism representative. Yes, but what does it do? Let's see, finance ministers. So it primarily focuses on trade, security, economics, and climate change. So it does appear that in the defining principles for the G7's one of its 4 priorities is security, and this would weigh in on security a little bit. Also, something that's interesting is that these countries highlighted in blue, which are the G7 members, and then these little ones in like sea green are kind of like European Union members, but they're not official members of the G7. These countries here, just the ones in blue, account for 50% of the world's wealth. And when you put it into a picture like this, that's honestly astounding to think that this small area of land versus the rest of it account for half of the world's wealth. It's a really crazy thing to think, but of course, in everything, there's always going to be a very, very small group at the very, very top, and this is that group, and they pretty much meet up at the G7 and, of course, discuss important issues and what they're all going to try and collectively do about it. But anyways, I do think that the G7, considering that it does focus on security, and it pretty much encompasses the United States and the European Union as a whole, along with Japan, which is also showing a lot of interest in supporting Ukraine, I believe that they could get some some headway in the direction of getting more support for Ukraine, and hopefully they do. Although I will have to say most of the countries in the G7, except for Japan, have largely already given as much support as they can or are willing to at the moment. And so I don't think the G7 is going to produce anything too fruitful from what we've already seen, because it's literally just the same countries that have already been talking about what they're going to send, joining together, and then, what are they going to do? Ask each other what they're going to send again? It's kind of a question that I'll have to wait to see to be answered, but hopefully it will get Ukraine a little bit more support, because this would be the perfect opportunity to do so. But I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have a question from Kevin B, who says, what happened to General Gerasimov? Does anybody know?
I don't know what happened to General Gerasimov. I don't really know what happens to any of the Russian generals that kind of like filter through this war. They just kind of exist, and then they're replaced promptly. The Russians have gone through about 6 or 7 generals over the course of this short war, which, to put into historical perspective, everyone thought Abraham Lincoln was crazy when he had gone through about his 4th or 5th general in the Civil War, and that was nearing the end when he finally picked Grant and just went with him. So when you put that into perspective, Putin is clinically insane. If everyone thought Lincoln was crazy back in the day for doing something like that, Putin is off the charts insane. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. Unfortunately, I can't really give one because I don't have enough information about it. But with that, we're now going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the rest of the news for the night.
And the last one of this segment comes from Grizzle, who says, what's it going to take for Ukraine to strike Belarus?
What's it going to take for Ukraine to strike Belarus? Well, you never want to do preemptive strike in Ukraine's position. They actually don't have any friends in a military alliance, so to speak. And so preemptively attacking Belarus would force their hand into this war. And so if they were on the fence about it, that of course would force them into the war. And then that would be a bad thing for them. The Ukrainians, if Belarus was to invade, the most beneficial thing for them to do would be to find the bridges first, which... there's not really a line up here. That's kind of bad news, but I guess you could obliterate the news in the bridge in Chernobyl, and you could probably not really do anything anywhere else. There's just not a lot of bridges here that rivers here that are large enough to make a destroyed bridge important. So I don't really know what they could destroy to try and stop a Belarusian advance if one was to occur. Maybe they could strike into Belarus, just a little over the front. They could probably strike at the bridges here on the Sas River in Gomel, and also the bridge down here near Borets. That would at least cut them off on that river from that area of the country, so that would kind of keep Chernihiv safe. You could also blow up the bridges crossing over the border in multiple areas. It looks like the first one is down here near Kurovo. They could, of course, destroy that bridge, but over here, in the rest of Ukraine, there's really no rivers or bridges to destroy to stop an advance by the Belarusians. So, sadly, I can't really answer that question all too well, but I hope that did at least try to provide some kind of answer. And with that, we've now reached the end of this question segment. We're now going to move on to the northern Donbass, the southern front, and the speech from President Zelenskyy. And so, without further ado, we've got no activity report all the way from Chuhuiv to Lyman. We're now going to move to Severodonetsk, where we have heard the unfortunate news that was confirmed today that the Ukrainians did withdraw from Severodonetsk and are now setting up defensive positions in Lysychansk. Now, there are some people out there who say that this means the Ukraine is losing, and it does not. Because everyone always wants to focus on the negative, okay? And yes, the Russians did take the city. That's of course, a defeat in a way. But no one's really thinking about all the cities that Russia failed to take, like Kharkiv, or Sumy, or Kyiv, or Chernihiv, or Zhytomyr, which they were trying to go down towards, but it even got stopped at Korostin, and also, I believe, Borodyanka. They didn't take, let me try and go down here, Zaporizhia, or Mykolaiv, or Kramatorsk, or Slovyansk, and they haven't taken Lysychansk. And a lot of people always want to focus on the negative, and they always want to look at this one picture here and say, oh, the Russians have finally secured one other victory beyond pretty much Kherson and Mariupol, and so the war is lost now, and they're losing. But that's not the case. They have won so many battles for so many other cities. The Russians still have a lot of ground to catch up on in that area. And the one city that they actually took that wasn't in the first week of the war, which was Kherson, which was Mariupol, it took them all the way until the middle of May to take that city. And so, is that really a victory, or is that a Pyrrhic victory? And I'm going to leave y'all with that rhetorical question, because I believe that was more of a Pyrrhic victory at that point than a crushing victory that showed that the Russians were getting the upper hand. And Severodonetsk was by no means a lopsided fight either. The Ukrainians held that city for nearly a month or more until they finally had to retreat over the river, and that was largely because of the frontline issues that are happening down here where the logistics have been cut off. And so while it is a defeat for Ukraine, I'll admit, I always like to try and look on the bright side and say that this isn't a terrible thing, because the Ukrainians, of course, have won so many other battles at this point, and this is one of the handful of battles that the Russians can claim they finally won. So with that, we're now going to move to one of the last videos we saw from the Severodonetsk area, which was a Russian tank being flattened by an M777. A kind of nice way to end out the Severodonetsk chapter of the war. And I'm going to show you all this here from the start. We can see this forest here, and we can see the M777 firing into it where the tank is. And we can now see it burning down there in the trees. That's the end of the video, and of course, a great way to end out the news from Severodonetsk is watching a Russian tank get obliterated by an American artillery piece that was British designed. I always have to give credit to the British for designing it, or else the British people in my chat will come and murder me. So, with that, we now know that Ukrainian forces have crossed the river, and they're in a very strong defensive position. One would be amiss to not talk about it because it's pretty much publicly known what Lysychansk is, which is kind of in its own way a natural fortress. The bluff on the other side of the river, where Lysychansk is around 400 feet higher than Severodonetsk, and on top of that, the Russians will have to cross the Severodonetsk River to get to the other side. So in these aspects, Lysychansk is an incredible defensive position, and they could even fire down on Severodonetsk from there. And so, in that regard, I think the Russians won't be met with any more success from the direction of Severodonetsk towards Lysychansk, and they're most likely going to be shifting all of their forces and all of their efforts down onto the area south of Lysychansk and also pushing directly into it. Excuse me, if they were able to actually threaten Bakhmut directly, that would be a massive hindrance in Lysychansk, as if the Russians were able to take Bakhmut, or at least take part of the M03 heading to the other highway leading in towards Lysychansk, that would cut off Lysychansk from supplies completely, and then they would be forced to withdraw because it would be an unattainable position. So that's kind of what we're looking at right now in the area, and there hasn't been a lot of news that came out of here today. I'm not really sure why, but it does appear because the Ukrainians are withdrawing and resetting their positions pretty much, and there's not a lot of video evidence of what they're doing because they're not one giving anything away. With that, we're now going to move down to the area of Kherson, where we can see a toss hitting Ukrainian positions. And of course, the Russians play cool music, but it just is what it is. It's a toss strike. We don't know how many Ukrainian forces were lost in this attack. We don't know if any Ukrainian equipment was lost in the attack either. All we see is some Russian, is a toss bombarding an area, and we don't really see much more than that. That's the end of the video, and an unfortunate one, but hopefully the Ukrainians didn't take many losses in that. With this, we're now going to move entirely out of the northern Donbass area, the quickest we've ever covered the northern Donbass in any news segment recently. We're now going to move down to the area of Donetsk, where today we saw in Marinka, the Russians got shelled by the Ukrainians. A little bit of tit for tat across the entirety of the front, and we can see here that the Ukrainians got the wool over the Russians' eyes. And of course, in Ukrainian films, we always see them actually battering the Russian forces that they say they did. When you see the Russians walking around this area, it looks like they're moving from destroyed house to destroyed house. Now the artillery is hit. And actually, correction, we're actually going to have to move on from this piece of news because I remember that man falling in that exact same way near that house now that I've seen it again. And this is actually old footage that we showed another day. And so with that, we actually, now I'm going to delete that so no one sees that and thinks it's from today. We actually have no news from the Donetsk area. And so we're now going to move on from the Donetsk area to Mariupol, where we can see civilians still pretty much struggling for life there as the water is so contaminated. They are now getting water out of a pothole in the road to try and live off of. A sad video to see. There's no hope for these people, you know, like I want to say that, hopefully they'll get some running water. The Russians don't care about them. They'll leave them to die. And the Ukrainians, if a counterattack was successful and started pushing towards Mariupol, it will most likely be months until the Ukrainians are able to get down there. And so the Russians have completely constructed this situation where these Ukrainians will be living in squalor and having to pretty much pray that rain comes so that way they can harvest the water out of potholes and stuff on the road to be able to try and live. It's a very sad thing. And I wish them the best, and I hope that they're able to make it through, because it's going to be very tough times for them in the months to come. With that, we're now going to move out of the Mariupol area, and we're now going to move further down to the area of the front line that is actually all the way over in Kherson. We didn't get any news today from the southern front pretty much in its entirety, and so now we are moving on to the Kherson area, where we saw a Stugna hit a Russian tank. Now, this video actually cut out everything that started off, the launch of the rocket and all that. All they started off with was the ecstatic cheers of the Ukrainian anti-tank crew as they hit this vehicle. Here's the video.
Єсть. Ну що, киці, доброго ранку, ми з України. Доброго. Давай, маленький, відправляй туди смаколик. Да. Чуть ниже, чуть ниже, чуть ниже, ниже. Стоп. Отлично. Сейчас въебе.
No! That guy at the tank got hit, and he went, no. Let's play that one more time.
Отлично. Сейчас въебе.
No! That's how I sound when I get a kill on War Thunder, and I understand. I gotta say, that man's celebration noise is just impressive sounding, to say the least. I've never heard anything like that. No! And I want that guy to go down in history for that. I think that was the best thing we've ever heard from a Stugna kill. Is no. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next video and another kill by the 36th Brigade. And credit to them, they've been doing a decent amount of work in the Kherson area. With that, we're now going to move on to Mykolaiv, where today we've seen a missile impact in the countryside around the city, showing that the Russians are still trying to claw at the city of Mykolaiv that is well out of their reach at this point. Here's the video. And what's insane is that this is a picturesque landscape right here. I'd actually say that this is very similar to southern England, with how the rolling kind of like landscape is. It's a little hilly. It's got nice farm fields on it. It's a very pretty place, and it's just interrupted by this missile that just lands in the middle of that field. Very unfortunate little video, but it's good to know that while it's still sad to see that the Russians are pretty much attacking civilians, they appear to have missed. It does look like the explosion, when we go back and look at it, occurred in some kind of a pond out there, because we saw some water splashing around at the bottom of that explosion. So we know that no one was most likely killed, which is a very fortunate thing. So with that, we're now going to be moving out to sea, where we saw that the Russians were launching more caliber cruise missiles into Ukraine today by ship. Here's the video. That's the end of the video, and more cruise missiles heading into Ukraine to cause untold destruction amongst the civilian population. And I pray that these missiles miss their marks and don't kill any civilians. With that, y'all won't believe it, but we've actually covered all the news there is today. And so, with that, we're now going to move back to Kyiv and full circle. And I highly suggest that y'all actually wait it through the speech and wait until the question segment, because I will be doing something new tonight in the background, so that way everyone will have something interesting to watch while I answer the questions. But we're now going to move on to the speech from President Zelenskyy. And so, here it is, the speech from the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy.
Незламні народи незламної країни. Росія сьогодні знову вдарила ракетами по Києву рано вранці. Друга армія світу звитяжно перемогла дитячий садочок і житловий будинок. Загинув чоловік, йому було лише 37 років. Є поранені. І серед них дівчинка, звати її Женя. Їй 7 років, донька загиблого. Зараз вона в Охмадиті. Також поранена її мати, до речі, громадянка Росії. Ось так. Їй в нашій державі нічого не загрожувало. Вона була у повній безпеці, поки в самій же Росії не вирішили, що усе для них тепер однаково вороже. Жінки, діти, дитячі садочки, житлові будинки, лікарні, залізниці. Ракети били і по Миколаївській області, і по Чернігівщині, і по Одесі, і по Черкасам. Артилерійські і мінометні обстріли не зупинялись і на Харківщині, і в Сумській області, і на Донбасі, і на півдні нашої держави. Мої співчуття рідним і близьким загиблих. Усім, хто був поранений, надається вся необхідна допомога. Частину ракет збито, але тільки частину. Нам потрібна потужна протиповітряна оборона, сучасна, повністю ефективна, яка може дати повний захист від цих ракет. Про це щоденно ми говоримо з партнерами. Є вже деякі домовленості, і партнерами треба рухатись швидше, якщо вони дійсно партнери, а не спостерігачі. Затягування з передачою зброї нашій державі, будь-які обмеження – це насправді запрошення для Росії бити знову і знову. Окупантів, цих терористів, треба бити з усієї сили, щоб вони не думали, що можуть тиснути і когось переграти. Про що ці ракети сьогодні? Про що і вчорашні 62 ракети? Це за одну лише суботу, за 24 години. Вони про російський почерк. Робити ескалацію щоразу, коли відбуваються міжнародні події. І водночас вони про рішучість. Про те, наприклад, що лідери Великої Сімки, які саме сьогодні зібрались в Німеччині на саміт, мають достатній спільний потенціал, щоб зупинити російську агресію і проти України, і проти Європи в цілому. Це можливо. Але це можливо тільки, якщо ми отримаємо все те, що запитуємо. І саме у такі терміни, у які потребуємо і зброю, фінансову підтримку, і санкції проти Росії. Інакше у цій війні не може бути, бо саме тут, в небі, над Києвом, в морі, біля Одеси, на землі Харківщини, Донбасу, у Херсоні і в Запорізькій області, ось де вирішується, яким буде життя в Європі надалі. Саме у нас, в Україні. І ніде більше. Звичайно, немає у Росії стільки ракет, скільки у нас є впевненості у власних силах, але російську зброю може зупинити тільки потужніша зброя. Говорив сьогодні про це з прем'єр-міністром Канади Джастіном Трюдо. Як можемо ще посилити оборонну підтримку для України і як можемо ще посилити санкційний тиск на Росію. Подякував Джастіну за вже надану допомогу, одну з найбільш відчутних. І сьогодні хочу сказати ще декілька речей, дуже адресних. Во-первых, все летчики, диспетчеры, техники и другие люди, которые обеспечивают запуск ракет по Украине, должны понимать, мы всех вас найдем. Каждый из вас будет отвечать за эти удары. И если кто-то думает, что уйдет от ответственности, сказав, что такой был приказ, вы ошибаетесь. Когда ваши ракеты бьют по жилым домам, это военные преступления. Суд – вот что вас всех ожидает. И вы не спрячетесь нигде. Ни на берегах Каспийского моря, над которым запускаются ваши ракеты, ни в Беларуси, нигде. И отдельно я хочу обратиться сегодня к гражданам Беларуси, к людям и к гражданским, и в погонах. Вас втягивают в войну. И даже активнее, чем это было в феврале и в весенний месяц. В Кремле за вас уже все решили. Ваши жизни для них ничего не стоят. Но вы не рабы и не пушечное мясо. Вы не должны умирать. И вы в силах не дать никому решать за вас. Что вас ждет дальше? Я знаю, что народ Беларуси поддерживает Украину. Они поддерживают нас, точно нас, а не войну. И именно поэтому вас, всех белорусов, российское руководство и хочет втянуть в войну, хочет посеять ненависть между нами. От простых людей Беларуси сейчас зависит очень много. И я знаю, что вы можете не участвовать в этой войне. Ваши жизни принадлежат только вам і только, а не кому-то в Кремлі. Україна буде захищатись від ударів з будь-яких напрямків і з будь-якої зброї. Я впевнений, ми вистоїмо і повернемо все своє. Але будь-яка людина, просто нормальна людина, в будь-якій державі, в тому числі в Білорусі, може зробити свій внесок у захист життя. Цей тиждень буде дуже важливим для нас усіх. Тому продовжуємо працювати на всіх рівнях і не збавляємо наш темп. Слава усім, хто захищає державу. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of President Zelensky's speech, and that rounds out the day 123 news of the war in Ukraine. Now, we're about to do something special during the question segment. Instead of me sitting here and answering questions while we stare at this map for about the next 30 minutes to an hour or so, I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. And I thought that a lot of y'all may like this. We're going to actually pull up some map quizzes from Europe. We're going to go to the first website we find, and I'm going to sit here and do Ukraine map quizzes while I answer y'all's questions, just because we can, and I also want to do something a little bit more interesting, so that way y'all aren't just looking at a map during the entirety of the stream. But if y'all did enjoy this, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will now be moving on into the question segment, and also we'll be talking about our fundraiser. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So first up from our live chat questions, which we do have quite a few, I want to say that we are at $11,912 on our fundraiser. So we are just a mere $80 or so away from reaching $12,000. So that would be absolutely tremendous if we could reach that. And a quick shout out to Edgar Moreno for throwing in a $100 donation. I'm not sure if my screen hasn't updated yet or not, but we might have just reached $12,000, and we'll see momentarily. But first up from our live chat, we have a question from Ukraine F. Putin, who says, does Enforcer think Vladimir Zelenskyy should win the Nobel Peace Prize?
I think, can you reread that one to me real quick? I didn't catch the name on the first part.
He says, does Enforcer think Vladimir Zelenskyy will win the Nobel Peace Prize?
It's Volodymyr Zelensky. I was really thrown off. I thought he said Vladimir like Putin, and then he said Vladimir Zelensky. That's like a real mix-up there. But to answer that question, I do believe that Volodymyr Zelensky should get the Nobel Peace Prize. In fact, he should be awarded a decent amount of awards for what he's done, specifically how he's stepped up to be a leader. Whether those be national awards in Ukraine or an international award like the Nobel Peace Prize, I do think that he should get one. I actually believe that Vladimir Putin also got a Nobel Peace Prize in the past, and Adolf Hitler got one too. And so just to put it into perspective, the Nobel Peace Prize isn't exactly the best thing on earth. But with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Din Jaron, who says, Enforcer, you keep saying that Ukraine is winning, but didn't they just withdraw from Severodonetsk? And I also saw on a Ukrainian news channel a bad report where the commander saying they lose 80% of troops.
The 80% of troops report was actually from a Special Forces unit, and just those of y'all who do not know, Special Forces during wars take massive amounts of casualties. That's kind of what they're for. You pick out the most dedicated people in the military, and then you send them out to die first, is kind of the principle behind Special Forces. And so that was true, but that wasn't reflective of every single unit on the front lines. That was just reflective of his unit. Also, on top of that, while Ukraine did lose Severodonetsk, and we'll revisit the map here, they lost Severodonetsk. When you zoom out and you look at that loss in the big picture, that's not really a lot. They've of course defended Kharkiv and Kyiv, and when you put that into a figure, Severodonetsk has a population of around 100,000. Kharkiv has a population of around 1.3 million, and so that city is almost 13 times smaller than Kharkiv. And so that kind of puts it into perspective how important that city was, at least from a population standpoint. But with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And ding, 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 we have reached $12,000 on our fundraiser. So absolutely tremendous. That might be the last landmark number we reach for the night. But if it's not, hopefully we can reach even higher. But we have reached $12,000. And thank you to all who have gotten us to this point. So we are now $2,000 over goal. So once again, the Leaf Spring Army came through big time. Everybody came in hot with those large donations, including all of our anonymous donors. And we appreciate all of you. So let's see here. Up next from our live chat, we have a question from Douglas Nyquist, who says, what happened in Moscow last night? I saw a lot of police cars.
Well, what happened in Moscow last night is that some kind of a convoy was moving through from one place to the Kremlin. We don't know where they came from, but we do know that it was apparently a VIP from what we can tell, because it was set up like a motorcade. They had the police cars surrounding the, of course, car, and they were moving that person to the Kremlin, but we don't really know a lot about who that person was or why they were going to the Kremlin, but that's the reason why you saw a lot of police cars last night. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up we have a question from Khan Azor, who says, Enforcer, you think that the cruise missile attacks are a Hail Mary for Putin, or are they just trying to break Ukraine's spirits?
I think that the cruise missile attacks are supposed to be a demoralizing thing, and so whenever there's a large international meeting going on around the world, and I'm sorry to everyone if I'm doing poorly, I do know some of the oblasts, but not all of them, but to answer that, to go back to that question and answer it, I think they do that, so whenever there's a large international event like the UN General Secretary coming to Ukraine, or the G7 summit, which could be a glimmer of hope for the Ukrainians, who could be hearing great news that's coming from these international events, the Russians, of course, are going to try and drown that out through civilian casualties and missile attacks on major urban areas. I think that's their primary goal, and so if I had to go with one or the other, I would say that's to demoralize the Ukrainians. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a live chat question from, well, first of all, before I get to that, let me give a shout out to Paolo Corradini, who just came in with the $250 donation and putting us up to $12,316. And let me also make sure that I haven't missed anyone here. We also got a $20 donation from Susie Q. And also, let me see, I think there's one more, a $5 donation from Larry Robley, and I think that was it. And if I have missed you, just know that we have recognized you in some way or another, and we appreciate your support. And also, getting a little distracted here, but we also had one more come in from Jim Darby, who put in a $20 donation. So thank you very much for all of the support, and thank you as well, Heather Fitzgibbon, for putting in that $20 donation as well. And before I get caught up in any more, our next live chat question is from Olivia McCarthy, who says, Enforcer, isn't it dangerous that we announce what weapon systems are going to Ukraine? Doesn't that give Russia the heads up?
It somewhat does, but not necessarily. Usually whenever we give those kinds of figures, the Russians will figure out anyways. You do have to remember that while the Russians are a dog at everything, one thing that they're not bad at is intelligence gathering. And of course, Putin is from the KGB, and so that's one thing that is within his wheelhouse. And so we know that there's probably a large amount of spies traveling around the world. People get killed in very weird places. Like when we went on a trip to Britain, we actually passed by a park the very same day that two old people who were double agents in their past lives got killed by Russian spies with a Novichok agent. So they do have spies, and they do operate all around the world. And so in that regard, I don't really think it's giving away too much information, because it pretty much come out anyways, especially once the Ukrainians got it and then said, hey, we've gotten this many of them, because the Ukrainians have never really gone without mentioning what they've gotten at some point. Like the Norwegians, of course, didn't mention that they were sending M109s, but then we saw Norwegian M109s in Ukraine. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And also, I didn't do well on that quiz. I didn't do well with the oblasts, so we're going to move on to another one from Ukraine. And we could also move on to other ones around the world as well if anyone wants to throw in a request. But we're now going to move on to Ukraine cities and try and answer that one. So with that, we are now on to the next question.
And a quick shout out to Kaltenberg for putting in that $50 donation. Thank you very much, Kaltenberg, for that. And also, Anonymous put in a $400 NOK donation. I'm not sure what NOK is, but some of you in the chat will know. So let me know. I do see that from time to time, and I would like to know what that means. So up next from our live chat, we have a question from Pakatang, who says, Enforcer, is it historically true that at the beginning of every war, people complain about military aid being delivered too slowly?
Kind of. It's kind of been the general principle, but not a lot of wars have involved countries sending over massive amounts of aid. That's kind of a new thing that came about during World War II, and in World War I, it wasn't the case with that because the country that needed arms was the United States. Look how far we've come in 100 years, and so the United States would send over the men, and then France and Britain would give them the arms that they were missing once they arrived in France. So it's kind of a new thing that happened in World War II. And in World War II, when we started the Lend-Lease with the Russians, that first year, we sent over 100,000 trucks, I believe a couple of thousand tanks, and it was just a massive amount of equipment, and also just a massive amount of raw materials. I think we also sent them over a decent amount of oil, because at that point, the United States was the #1 producer of oil. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. I don't think there's a historical precedent at the moment to say that usually people complain that the delivery of weapons is slow, but I do believe that that is the case in this war, and also there's a lot of political rigmarole that everyone's trying to get around in this one. It isn't a black and white thing like World War II. So with that, hope that does answer the question, and I just got a 94% on that quiz, and so we're going to move on to the next one, which will be the difficult version of the cities. So with that, we are now on to the next question.
And to the next question, we have one from Heather Fitzgibbon, who says, Enforcer, will phosphorus burn through metal?
I don't think phosphorus will burn through metal. What can phosphorus burn through? Let's see here. What can white phosphorus burn through? White phosphorus produces cruel injuries to, let's see. White phosphorus can burn people to the bone, smolder inside the body, and reignite when bandages are removed. But that doesn't really tell us what it can burn through. I think it can burn through anything like wood, but I think metal is going to be out of the picture, because if it could burn through metal, then they most likely just make anti-tank rounds with white phosphorus on it, and it would eventually burn through the tank's armor. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I don't think it can burn through metal, as far as I know, but I may be wrong. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a question from Kitchen Cabinet Refacing, Renovation, and Remodeling, who says, Mr. Enforcer, here's my question. What can you say about different companies coming together to rebuild Ukraine? Is there a website or a program put together as of yet? Thank you, from Robert Stack in Nova Scotia.
And I thank you so much for the, of course, question, and I don't think at the moment, and can you reread that one to me real quick, Matthew, to make sure I get it right?
So yes, Kitchen Cabinet Refacing, Renovation, and Remodeling says, what can you say about different companies coming together to rebuild Ukraine? Is there a website or a program put together as of yet?
I don't think there's a website or a program put together for that at the moment, but I do know that tons of people have been chomping at the bits for an opportunity to do just that. But at the moment, I don't know of any efforts of people trying to gather together and do that sort of thing. But based off of your account name, I think you may be a company that's looking forward to doing something like that. And so I always say, because I did just start this channel off by having friends in Ukraine and wanting to, you know, put their best interests in mind and cover the war for them, you might want to step forward yourself and try and start a project like that, because you might get a massive following, considering that I don't know of anyone who's done something like that yet. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Lisa Johnson, who says, Enforcer, if Belarus jumps in the war and attacks Ukraine, will another country come in, as in boots on the ground, to help Ukraine? Thank you very much.
Yes, if it was a chemical, biological, or nuclear attack, we know that the United States would most likely step in, because that's the obligation they made a pretty good while ago. They said if any chemical, biological, or nuclear attack would occur, they would step in immediately and pretty much stop everything dead in its tracks. And so, with that, I hope that does answer the question, because we know that at least the United States would step forward and help them, and if anyone in the world matters in terms of getting help from, it would be the United States, since it is the military juggernaut of the world. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from It's Me Man, who says, is there any way to help directly Irina and her family? I sent a similar message to Denis Davidov. Helping someone specifically would be great.
Unfortunately, I don't know of any ways to help out specific individuals, and that is something, just being honest about how this channel works, that's something I usually want to veer away from, is helping out specific individuals and helping out organizations instead, because if I was to try and help out individuals, there would be a load of people, and we've had a decent amount of them in the background that I quickly dismiss, that come forward and say stuff like, hey man, if you could run a fundraiser for me and raise me $20,000 and give it to me personally, I will go and buy a drone and then buy a plane ticket and fly to Ukraine and fly it around. And while that does sound like a great fundraiser idea that you have right there, I want to avoid doing that, because then that's of course going to cause a lot of people to try and step forward and maybe have me run a fundraiser for them personally, and that's something I want to generally avoid. And I usually like going with fundraisers that we have a tried and true track record of showing that they actually do provide the support that they say they do. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. I always want to make sure that my viewers are as detached from potential scams as possible. And while that one isn't a scam, I think that's a very, nice sounding one, for a nice person who's been doing a lot. I still don't want to go down that path, because it would eventually lead to people trying to have those as fundraisers on the channel. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. I wish you the best of luck, and I hope that there is a fundraiser out there like that. But unfortunately for this channel, I wouldn't run a fundraiser like that specifically. But I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, Enforcer, how many, excuse me, I'm going to start over. Enforcer, how many war crimes can Russia get away with before NATO intervenes?
Well, that's a really tough question, because NATO is really more of a defensive alliance, and so technically they can really get away with all the war crimes in the world as long as they're not chemical, biological, or nuclear, which would make the United States step in. That they would ever wish for, and so they could continue to kill civilians and whatnot, and NATO isn't really going to step in, because there's no clause in the NATO charter that says once a country commits so many of these kinds of war crimes, we're going to step in. There's nothing like that in NATO, sadly. It's entirely defensive, meaning that if they get attacked, they're all going to unite and fight against that one enemy. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Ken, who says, Enforcer, with the use of heavy artillery, how long before the Russians have to start replacing the barrels? Is that a field replacement, or do they need to be shipped back for refurbishment?
Excellent question, and that's something I do know a little bit about, because our reenacting group does World War I stuff. To answer that question specifically, you would have to talk about the specific caliber of the weapon, because that kind of indicates how many rounds it can fire before it has to be rebored. So for larger caliber weapons, it's usually around 60 to 70, at least in World War I metallurgy standards. And if you're going with a smaller caliber, it could be several hundred rounds before it has to be rebored. But once that barrel wears out, you have to take the entire artillery piece and send it back all the way into the country to a specifically made place that will be able to replace that barrel and rebore it. As far as I know, that's a process that requires them to go back to an actual factory, because that's something that I don't think you can do on the front lines. It's not as quick as a barrel change on a machine gun. It's heavily involved. You have to, of course, have cranes and such things like that, and most likely an entire factory to work on something like that. So I hope that does answer the question, at least on my end, and I could be wrong in that perspective. I will say that. That's something that I know in a World War I standard, but that's something I don't really know about in the modern standards. So based off of World War I, they would have to be sent back. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from E. Genth, who says, do the LPR and DPR killed in action count? Is it included in the official number?
I don't think those are included in the official number. I think those are separate. I'm not entirely sure, though. They may be. As far as I know, it's just Russian forces casualties that are being accounted for, and those may include the DPR and LPR. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And up next, we have a question from Pakatang once again, who says, "Do you feel that your success with this channel is because you are uniquely prepared for this, or is there some other reason?"
Well, the truth is that I'm an agent working for the CIA, that is trying to spread propaganda, and of course I'm joking about that. The reason why I succeed at this channel is a really tough question for me to answer because while I like to toot my own whistle every once in a while, I don't want to make it a habit, in saying that I have like a special set of skills, and stuff like that. I feel like that's like tooting my own whistle a little bit too much. I feel like a lot of people just enjoy with the way I deliver things. It's always upbeat. It's kind of, not really taking it too seriously. It's not treating it like a funeral. And you can just get the news and, of course, have a little bit of a laugh and kind of point out the common normal things that someone would look at there. So, I think that's why it succeeds. I'm not really sure why. I think it's honestly because the YouTube algorithm blessed me for a bit and sent me to the moon, and that's how a lot of people found me, and then a lot of people just liked my channel. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And Matthew, could you run a poll? We're going to ask the question here because I actually see that a lot of our viewers are actually staying more so than normal. And so if you could, Matthew, ask them, do they like me doing the map quizzes during the question segment? And just put a yes or no, and we're going to see if people do like this, because if so, I'll keep on doing this.
All right.
And once you do that, we'll move on to the next question.
Okay, and let's see. There we go. That poll should be coming up any minute now, and there it is. So please feel free to answer that poll and let us know what you think. So up next, let me get that poll out of the way so I can see what I'm doing here. Just a moment. So we have a question from Duncan VR who says, "Is it safe to eat the new Russian McDonald's burgers? What is the meat substitute? Is it sheep meat or something else? Slava Ukraine."
Well, thank you for that question. I have no idea about Tasties, really, beyond the fact that they exist. I don't know the food quality. I don't know about the food safety, the hygiene, or anything like that. All I know is that they're supposed to be a replacement McDonald's, and they're pretty much using all of the same things down to the condiment packets because they're taking a Sharpie and marking out the M on them. And so in that instance, I would say... Oh man, I would say I honestly don't know a lot about Tasties, just being honest with you, beyond their existence. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in a degree. I think, though, that the food quality is probably a little bit lower. But with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from GHJKLZ, who says, "If Russia gives nukes to Belarus, should NATO give nukes to Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia?"
Oh, that's a tough question. The thing is that do we want, as the United States, do we want other nuclear weapons to land in the hands of other countries that, could go south? They're our friends now, but think about like 50 years in the future, they could go south, and then they got nuclear weapons. And we don't want to arm everyone in the world with nuclear weapons, because then that's just going to create deadlock, and there's going to be no way to do anything anywhere, because they could just threaten to obliterate your country from the ground up and turn it to ashes. So if the Belarusians get nukes, I feel like there should be a massive political protest to that, since they'll be violating multiple treaties. But I don't really feel like we should be giving more countries nuclear weapons. The United States is pretty much the nuclear shield of the Western world, and I think in that sense alone, the Baltic states already have their own nuclear umbrella in a way, and it's provided by the U.S. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Benny Jesuit, who says, "With the list of lost armaments and troops, what is the tally on the generals?" And Benny, I will say that if they're bringing out people like Mr. Lunchtime out of retirement, they must have lost quite a few.
And I would have to agree with Matthew's statement right there. I believe that the Russians are in such a bind for generals. We don't know the specific number at the moment, but they are in such a bind for generals that they had to bring out big man, Mr. Lunchtime, 67 years old on top of that, to command the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. And if they're pulling someone out that's that old to try and carry on this war, things are not going well for him. We'll just say that. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in brief. Don't really know of a way to go into that one too well, because the interior politics of the Russians, along with how their military actually is operating up at that kind of level, is pretty much unknown to everyone in the West. So it's really hard to answer those kinds of questions. But with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Vitaly, who says, have you guys heard or covered the Russian soldiers in Kherson shooting at each other in order to give them a reason to retreat because the Ukrainian army is moving in?
I have not heard about that. That has not reached our ears, and we don't have any video evidence of it. I'm not saying it's not true or true, but this channel, of course, does revolve a lot around video evidence and picture evidence, and we don't have any of that. So sadly, I can't tell you if that's true or not. And I can't tell you whether I've heard of it or not because I haven't. But with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a live chat from Darren Young, who takes a shot at Mr. Lunchtime and says, does Mr. Lunchtime weigh 400 pounds? I'd love to see him laying on his stomach firing a rifle.
That is a very good question. I don't think he could lay down and fire a rifle. I think if he tried to lay down, he would roll away. But I do think he could shoot a rifle. I think the recoil would be pretty manageable for an absolute beast of a, well, not really a beast, but I would say an absolute unit of a person, that Mr. Lunchtime is. But, you know, I think he may weigh more than 400 pounds, maybe around 500. But with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Louise Highsmith, who says, I saw a clip of a late-night run to the Kremlin, supposedly by Putler. Any more info on that?
We did see the vehicles on the move, but we don't know anything about who was in it and where it was going. It could have been Putin, it could have been Sergei, it could have been Medvedev, it could have been anyone, as far as we know. We have really no idea, sadly. So with that, I hope that answers the question in a way. I know that was a real cop-out right there, but there was no information about that convoy rather than we saw it on the move. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And just a quick update on the fundraiser. The number at the moment is $12,540. So I think we've gone up. I can't remember how much, but we have gone up for certain. So great job on that. And thank you all once again for donating. And also, we have a handful of live chat questions left. So if you would like to throw in your own live chat question, I will see it, and it's a pretty good odd it'll get answered as well. So feel free to throw it in, and we will try to get to it before the stream ends. So up next, we have one from Mark King, who says, is it true that the Russian military lost more than 4,000 troops in Severodonetsk?
We don't know the specific number of the casualties per battle at the moment, but I wouldn't doubt it. It was a long battle. It lasted about a month, and so imagining the Russians to be losing 4,000 men in that one battle would seem on par, but we don't have any specific information to back that up with or shoot down that assumption with. So at this point, it's nothing more than an assumption, but I hope that does answer the question. I could agree it's most likely around 4,000, but we really have no proof of that yet. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
All right, and up next, we have a question from Anthony Bestwick, who says, Enforcer, do you agree that as long as Russia sends missiles aimed Ukraine cities, the USA should send atacms to take out logistics in Russia?
I mean, I can get behind that, yeah. Let me look at some pictures of this real quick, though. God, that's like a Scud. Jeez, I didn't expect that. I saw it on an M270. I was like, oh, it must be like a longer range rocket of that, but that's pretty much a Scud. But the thing is that if we provide American-made weapons to strike into Russia, that seems to be a bit of a political issue we're skirting around right now. We told the Ukrainians when we gave them the M142 that under no circumstances is that to be fired into Russia. And I believe that we wouldn't be giving them these kinds of weapons because their entire purpose of us giving them to them under that pretext would be to, of course, hit the Russians with them inside of Russia. So I hope that answers the question. I think the answer would most likely be we wouldn't do something like that. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and next up, we have one from Alabama Cajun, who says, when do you think Ukraine will start bombing the puppet city governments planted in the occupied territories?
I don't think they will. I don't think they want to bomb the little puppet city halls and, well, really city governments and stuff like that in occupied territories, because those kinds of attacks could kill Ukrainian civilians, and that would look very bad for them, and it would also make the Ukrainians question why they really do hate the Russians, because then it would seem like the Russians are defending them against their own government. So I don't think they will be attacking those puppet governments at the moment, because that could actually embitter the occupied Ukrainian populations against their own government and their own military. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, we have another question from Sweaty Chungus, who says, Enforcer, what is your take on Starsky wanting SpaceX to move into Hostomel?
I think that's an interesting point. I think that SpaceX is, if I'm correct, Matthew, I want you to back me up on this one. You might know. But SpaceX is moving into either Texas or Huntsville.
I think SpaceX is already in Texas, and I think they might be building a facility in Huntsville, but I'm not really sure.
Now, I'm just going to say, I do support Ukraine 100%, but if it gets in a competition of what Alabama gets if they are moving a sub-headquarters here versus Ukraine, I would want the SpaceX headquarters to be here in Alabama. And, I mean, like, but really, honestly, to give all due credit, Ukraine does have a lot of land and a very low population density for the size of their country, and there would be a decent amount of just empty land in Ukraine that you could, of course, build launch sites out of. So, I mean, like, you know, it's an idea, but of course, if SpaceX is already coming to Huntsville and that was the option, is whether it would be here in my state or here in Ukraine. Hate to sound selfish, but I would like them to wind up in Alabama instead. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one. And wait a minute, before we move on, right now it's asking me to click on the map of Ukraine, and oh, it's a tough one. I would imagine this one. And with that, we're on to the next question.
All right, and up next we have a live chat, more like a statement, but I'm going to sort of turn it into a question because I think it's pretty interesting. So Martin Van Owen says, nuclear proliferation should be without question reduced by whatever means possible. That should be the direction the world goes in based on how all of this plays out in a conventional way. So Enforcer, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are, I generally agree. I believe that nuclear arms should be relegated down to a lower and lower number internationally until the point where no country has nuclear weapons. And here's the reason why. With a nuclear shield off of every single country, where not a single nation in the world has nuclear weapons, that's going to open up the world to become a lot more fluid. And when I say fluid, keep in mind that it has a little bit of a negative side effect when I say fluid. It's going to lead to more conventional wars. It's going to lead to more deaths in war. But at the same time, it's not going to leave countries like the Chinese, where we know that there are concentration camps in the eastern part of in the western part of China at the moment. It wouldn't allow them to do such things that they're doing now and get away with it, because no one would be scared of getting, you know, obliterated in nuclear hellfire. You could just go to war with them. Also the same with Russia. If the Russians didn't have nuclear weapons right now, they wouldn't be so emboldened to do the things they've been doing and say the things they're saying, because a conventional war would be on the horizon and it would be something they couldn't win. And so I think that nuclear weapons should be removed by and large from every single country until they're non-existent, so that way countries can go back to settling scores through conventional war. And while that does sound terrible, and most people would say, oh, but we should get rid of nuclear weapons to get rid of war altogether, I'm going to tell you this. Many people throughout history have set out on the course of peace in our time. Millions of people, hundreds of millions of people, as a matter of fact. The entirety of World War I and World War II were caused and ended by people wanting peace in our time, and they never were able to get it. There is no way in this world that people, being the quarrelsome, combative group we are, could ever get world peace. That's something I know is off the table. And so if I had the option of, you know, the potential of millions of people dying in conventional wars, or the entirety of the northern hemisphere of the world being obliterated and glassed by nuclear weapons, I would pick the millions of people dying in conventional wars over civilization pretty much ceasing to exist, because I feel honestly that the Russians would probably launch nukes at American military assets around the world, which are in Africa, the Middle East, and everywhere, really. And so I think that no part of the world would be safe from a nuclear war. So I believe that honestly we should try and relegate nukes down to nothing so that way we can have more conventional wars, honestly, because I feel like that would be the ultimate decider. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And just for everybody that is still here, please feel free to smack that like button as hard as you can. I see we're up to 2.1 thousand likes, and hopefully we can get a little higher on that like button as well. So, up next, we have a question from Ringard1, who says, I'm not gonna lie, not happy world power discards human life so blatantly. Enforcer, do you believe terror tactics like indiscriminate bombing are morally wrong?
I do believe they are. That idea though, and this is one thing that I do like to say. If you asked me that question in terms of World War II, I would say that indiscriminate bombing was completely acceptable. But that was a different time, and precision-guided bombs were not a thing. And we didn't have that kind of control over weaponry. You dropped the bomb and it went wherever it went. The Americans were the only one in World War II to have that kind of technology, and at that point, it was in such an infancy that it was practically unusable. It would have never been successful, and that's a whole rabbit hole of its own. But my ideas of what is acceptable has changed throughout time, and so it's not a set thing. I don't look back in history and call people barbarians in World War II for doing that. That's what they had to do. But in the modern day, with the technology we have, indiscriminate bombings like we see the Russians doing are literally unacceptable by every single measure. Weaponry has come so far, as in you can literally fly a small dog-sized, a very small dog-sized drone miles away with a small bomblet attached and drop it onto a tank and destroy it. And with that kind of weaponry and with that kind of precision, it is absolutely asinine to say that it is still an acceptable thing in such a climate with warfare and its technology to indiscriminately bomb civilians to try and win a war. It seems unacceptable in the modern context. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one.
And next up, I'm not sure if we've already answered this question or not, but I'll ask it anyway just in case we haven't. We have one from Paul Polanski, who says, Enforcer, do you think that if Belarus attacks Ukraine, will another country, such as Poland, in turn attack them?
No, I don't think they would, because then that would draw the Poles into this war, and it wouldn't be good for them, you see, because they would be attacking, so they wouldn't get the Article 5 protection that is provided to them through NATO. The Article 5 in the NATO Charter says that if any country in NATO is attacked, then the rest of the alliance will respond like they were attacked themselves. But it doesn't say anything about if one of the members of the alliance lashed out at another country, then everyone would join them. It doesn't say that, and so they wouldn't be pursuant to the protections of Article 5, and also they would be under a lot of political duress at the moment from more successful countries economically like Germany, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States to not do something like that, to the point that they may try and find a way to boot them out of NATO if they were to do something like that, although there is no provision in the NATO Charter to do such a thing. I don't think, honestly, just looking at this in a perspective of what would be good for Poland, I don't think it would end up being good for them, because the Russians could just end up going ape, and just nuking the Ukrainians and the Poles and then going into a world war, but that would have done neither Ukraine or Poland any good at that point. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. I also just saw the results of that poll come in, Matthew, which was really interesting to me.
Yes, it looks like 66% of you said that yes, you like the new map quizzes thing during the question segment, and 33% of you said, no, I don't like the map quizzes thing.
And I think with that in mind, we're going to continue the map segment thing because it appears to be somewhat popular.
Indeed.
And so with that, oh wow, I got Sarajevo wrong. With that, we're on to the next question.
And real quick, let me give a shout out to Sweaty Chungus for putting in that $5 donation and keeping us rolling and making progress on the fundraiser. So thank you, Sweaty Chungus. And up next, we have about, it looks like 3 more questions here, maybe 4 more questions from the live chat. We have one from Old War Vet who says, Enforcer, do we know just how many missiles the orcs have stockpiled?
I hate to say it, man. I hate to give a cop-out like this on a lot of questions, but I honestly don't know the figure. I don't think anyone knows that figure. Usually things like ammunition and missiles themselves no one ever really cares to get the numbers on that. And it's really hard to confirm numbers on that because they're usually kept within warehouses where you can't take satellite pictures of them and count them up. Like surprisingly, a lot of our intel is gathered like that of a satellite flying over Russia. It takes a picture, and then we take a look at how many tanks we can count that were taken in that satellite film, and that's how we kind of get our estimation of how many tanks they have. So with that, I hope that answers the question. That we actually don't have a way, at least on our end here on this channel, to know how many missiles they have. But with that, also, real quick thing before we move on to the next question. Some of y'all may see that it's telling me to click on Vaduz. And just for those of y'all who don't know, Vaduz is actually the capital of Liechtenstein, and it's the only city, I believe, within it. So with that, we're on to the next question.
And Enforcer, I see a lot of people saying something about there's a plop or a clicking noise coming from the poles, and they're wanting to know if you can somehow turn it down.
We'll turn that sound off on the little thing here, and we'll just click the things without any sound. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And real quick, a shout out to LG for putting in a $20 donation. Thank you very much for that. And also, I saw something else here, and I'm not going to cover that for the moment. And I'm going to move on to the next live chat question, which is from B. Baldy, who says, did you know the Ukrainian post office is back up? You can order online the shirts and the stamps.
I did see that, and I thought that was really cool. We actually had someone mention that a couple of days ago on the channel, and we pulled it up, and you can actually get the stamps at a pretty reasonable price, along with a whole bunch of other merch that the Ukrainians are running, and kind of plugging a little bit. Zelenskyy wears a decent amount of the merch on his speeches that you can get. And so, yes, we did know about it, and it is actually really cool. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and we are on to the next one. And also, Matthew, if you want, could you tell me what we were not going to address on stream over Discord chat, because I can take a look at it on my phone.
All right, and will do. And moving on to our next live chat question here, we have one from Muley Man, who says, Enforcer, do you know if America has supplied Ukraine with airburst ammunition for HIMARS and M777? It would be great to see some of them going off above the Russians' heads.
We know that the French provided 155mm airburst ammunition, which is compatible with the M777. It's the exact same caliber. However, we don't know about the M142 getting airburst. I think they got straight up impact rounds for the M142, but we do know that the M777, if needed, could take the French airburst rounds and use those. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from Joshua Fons, who says, Enforcer, can you explain to us what the North Atlantic Treaty is?
The North Atlantic Treaty, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and I want to make sure I get this correct, North Atlantic Treaty. Well, let me just, it's the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. I just want to make sure. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization was founded in 1949, and if you may remember, at this point, it was seen that the Soviet Union was about to become the next rival of the West. And so all of these countries over here, West Germany, which was under, I believe, military occupation still at that point, West Germany, or the occupied parts of it, France, Britain, the United States, Italy, Spain, and multiple other countries, including Norway, and then Sweden and Finland vowed to stay neutral, were concerned about the growing threat of the Soviet Union and how they had created pretty much a whole bunch of puppet states east of East Germany that were a large military alliance. And so they were thinking, oh man, they're pretty powerful, and at the time they were, in raw manpower, they were incredibly powerful. And so they were thinking, well, they could just really steamroll the entirety of the West one by one because we don't have any kind of alliance protecting us all. And so they came up with a North Atlantic Treaty Organization to protect themselves against the Soviet Union. And then NATO became obsolete in 1991 in a way when the Soviet Union collapsed, and then it looked like they were never going to recover at that time. But as time has continued on, instead of dying, NATO actually expanded instead, and they took on Poland. Of course, they took on pretty much all of the countries in the Balkans, including Romania, Hungary, the Czechs, the Slovaks, the Austrians, I believe, were already in NATO. The Slovenians, the Croatians. They didn't take on the Serbs, and I think some of these countries here, like Kosovo and I believe Bosnia, are still not a part of NATO. But Bulgaria is, Greece is, Turkey is, pretty much the whole gamut of Europe now is inside of NATO, as well as the Baltic states, which are probably the most important gain for them in the 2000s. And so pretty much their entire goal now is to counter the Russians, who immediately tried to resurge after about a 7-year downtime as a rival to the United States and the Western world still, although that was kind of a halfway point around that time, and it really started to spring off in the later 2000s, around 2008, when Russia invaded Georgia. And so I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we are on to, I believe, the last one of the night, if I'm correct.
Yes, and it is going to be the last one of the night. But before we get there, I want to recognize Dad Good for putting in a $50 NZ donation, and also Trolling Them Softly for putting in a $20 donation. So thank you very much to both of you for that. And we are now up to $12,637 on the fundraiser. So very high and very good, and we're over goal, as I mentioned earlier. So I'm just trying to see here. Let's see. So the last one of the night comes from Tanuvan, who says, do you think that Germany, Spain, and some of the other countries are intentionally being slow on delivering equipment?
We know that Germany is intentionally being slow. They have sent over a little bit of stuff. As far as we can tell, it's very small stuff. Some people said that the Panzerhaubitz 2000s are already in Ukraine, but we've never seen any picture or video evidence of them, and so as far as we're concerned, they're not there. But I do think they're dragging their feet for a specific reason. I believe the British and the French are as well, so that way they don't actually have to hand over any of that stuff. But we know that the United States is still handing over stuff right now, and so in that aspect, they aren't really dragging their feet. But I see that a decent amount of the Western European countries, not really the French are still providing a decent amount of arms along with the Brits, but the Germans are lagging behind, and it's been very clear for quite some while. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I believe that was the last one for the night, if I'm correct.
I believe so. Let me see. Let me make sure I haven't missed any here. I want to make sure that we give everybody a chance to get a question in. It looks like we have one last question, and it's going to be from Den Jaron, who says, Enforcer, didn't Ukraine give up their nukes for a guarantee of peace? No way would Russia attack Ukraine if it still had nukes. That was a big mistake. Look at the results.
Oh, that is true. The Ukrainians did have nukes at a time, and that was when the Soviet Union had dissolved, and they just inherited almost 1,000 nukes. The problem was that Ukraine was so dirt poor at the time, considering they were a Soviet country and everything in the Soviet Union was dirt poor in the Soviet Union, and then outside of the Soviet Union, when it actually had to step up into the real world, it was dirt poor. And so they actually had no way to pay for the maintenance of those nukes, and so most of them would have ended up on the black market or so poorly maintained that they would have maybe had major radiological issues or maybe even have exploded. And so there really was no chance of them hanging on to those missiles. And so when given the chance in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, they gave them up because there was really no way for them to keep them. And also, pretty much the entire world was threatening heavy sanctions against them because of that reason. So then they gave them over, I believe, to the Russians or the West, which then dismantled pretty much all of them. And also, the Russians didn't keep them because the United States was actually paying Russia during the 90s to go to Russia and deactivate nuclear submarines and nuclear weapons that they no longer had the funds to maintain. So with that, I hope that does answer that question. If we have another one, we can move on to the next one.
All right, and I'm just scrolling through here to see if I'm seeing any last-minute questions. Let's see here. So I'm not seeing any questions last minute. So I think that is going to be the last one of the night. And before we sign off, I want to say once more, thank you for hanging with us for such a long stream tonight for our fundraiser. And thank you all for donating as well. Our final figure of the night is $12,657. And once again, it's another one for the books. And we have done tremendous. So thank you very much, Loose Spring Army. And as for me, this will be my last time talking for the night. So we will see you all on Tuesday. And it was good seeing everybody once again.
And I have to say to everyone once more, I thank you all so much for watching. A lot of y'all stayed around for the map segment, which was kind of cool to me. Usually we see a massive slump off of viewers, but tonight it was like a little gradual decline throughout the night. Only about 1,000 people left from the end of President Zelensky's speech to the end of the question segment. And so apparently a lot of y'all were interested in watching me do the quizzes. So That was pretty cool. But anyways, I thank you all so much for coming tonight and, of course, raising so much support for Ukraine. $12,000. $12,000 in a single night. That's honestly incredibly impressive that we're still able to do something like this as a whole, as the Lee Spring Army. And I am more than proud to every single one of you, especially the anonymous person who put in the $7.5 thousand donation for helping us to reach this goal. If it wasn't for y'all, this channel wouldn't be what it is, and the Lee Spring Army wouldn't be what it currently is. On top of that, I've noticed tonight that we didn't get a DDoS attack, and we also didn't have any cam bots come through the chat, which is wonderful to me. We haven't had our usual occurrences tonight. It's bizarre, as it was very nice and refreshing to me, and I'm happy that everyone was able to make it through this stream without a single DDoS attack on them. And so for the first time in many days, we were actually able to round out the stream on the very one that we started. And so I thank you all so much for watching again, and I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. Thank you all once again. I hope you all had a fun time watching tonight, and I hope you all stay safe until we get back on Tuesday, and then I'll wish you all to stay safe at the end of that stream again. And so with that, hope you all have a great night. Take care, and I'll see you all around.